a short video here on the subject of, do above the knee rack pulls help your deadlift lockout? So, I've heard things about this over the years. I competed in powerlifting from 1987 to 1991. And I remember back in those days, our main source of powerlifting information was Mike Lambert's Powerlifting USA. And I remember reading in Powerlifting USA, it was either Ken Leisner or Roger Estep. Both of them had articles, and one of them talked about powerlifters doing rack pulls to help their deadlift sticking points. And they said something to the effect of, it really doesn't do much good because when you're doing a rack pull, you put yourself in the perfect, position, leverage wise, that the bar should be in when you're doing a deadlift and, hit a sticking point. But when you're doing the actual deadlift, the reason you're getting the sticking point is because, maybe it's not that your muscles are weak there, but you have other muscles that are weak, and it's causing the bar to get in a bad, disadvantageous, leverage position. Like, so in my case, in those days, deadlift ended up being my best lift. My best deadlift was an 80 FPA, 685, 1989. And at the time, it was a meet record, it was a state record, and it was a regional record. And there was only, three organizations, the APF, the USPF, and the ADFPA. So it was pretty good back then. So I had a pretty good deadlift, but the thing is my sticking point would always be at my lockout. And I read that in Powerlifting USA, so I just I said, well, to, practicing deadlifts out of the rack don't help your deadlift sticking point or your deadlift lockout, so I'm not going to do it. And then later on, as I started getting on, many years later, decades later, when I started getting on social media, I hear other people say the same thing. And they say, rack pulls or deadlift, rack pulls above the knee don't help your deadlift lockout. Don't bother them. They don't do anything. And so, well, when I was competing in powerlifting, my sticking point was at my lockout. And what would happen was that I was a quad dominant squatter, so my quads were good, and my hamstrings were weak, the weak point, and my erectors were very strong. So I would pop the bar off. I didn't jerk, but I would get the bar off the floor with my quads, my erectors, get it, my back, get real high up, and I get to the lockout, and I'd hit a sticking point, and that's where I'd miss right at the top. But what would happen was my friend would always tell me, back then we didn't have video cameras, so you couldn't video yourself. I thought that was a huge disadvantage, to having a camera. Man, now with the video, it's a great advantage. You see everything you're doing wrong. So you relied on your training partners to tell you what you were doing wrong, but you couldn't really get a visual of it. Like with, for me, it's so much easier when I watch myself. I can see exactly what I'm doing right, exactly what I'm doing wrong, and make adjustments just like that. He'd always tell me, man, the bar is so out in front of you. And so the bar would get way out in front of me, instead of being close up on me. And so I would get stuck. But the reason it was getting so far out in front of me is, because those muscles were weak. The posterior chain, the hamstrings were weak. And so I get the bar off the floor so fast, my hips would rise so fast, and then I'd be, pulling, my legs would almost be locked out. The bar would still be, way down low, and I'd have to pull like that. The bar would get out in front of me. So fast forward to years later, and well, I never really liked doing shrugs. I want to do some type of upper back, trap exercise. And so when I competed in powerlifting, really all I did was, I had a good deadlift, but all I did was deadlifts. I would do stiff-legged deadlifts off a block. Nowadays they call them deficit deadlifts, but back then I would do stiff-legged deadlifts off a pretty high block, and I would do lat pull-downs. That was really all I did. I didn't do rows. Um, I didn't do anything for shoulders. Didn't do anything for rear delts, and so that was all I did. That was where my sticking point was. But I never did rack pulls because I read that in Powerlifting USA. It doesn't help you any because the problem is not that your muscles are weak. That sticking point. The problem is that you're in a bad leverage. You're in a disadvantageous leverage position when you're trying to you know get past that sticking point. So I just never did them. Years later, I heard guys say on YouTube that rack pulls don't help your deadlift lockout. They don't carry over at all. They don't do anything for it. So, but I want to do something to work my traps, work my upper back, and I never liked doing shrugs. I tried a little bit of that, but I never thought they were really that good of an exercise. I did high pulls for a while, but I had felt like I had some kind of tendonitis in my right forearm, so I didn't really like doing those. Um, and I would do chest supported penalty rows, whatever. But I heard a lot of good things about rack pulls. Mainly from Alex Leonidas and Alpha Dead. So I started doing them or whatever. And now I still deadlift. I try to do strength work, 57, but I try to do strength work, and mainly I just do RDLs off of deficit. But periodically when my back feels good, every once in a while I try to do some conventional deadlifts, try to do some sumo deadlifts. I always pull conventional, but I feel like practicing wider stance squats and doing good mornings and RDLs. So my posterior chain and my hamstrings have improved a lot. Not just in strength but also development. And so anyway, I started doing rack pulls, above the knee rack pulls with a snatch grip, to develop the upper back and the traps. And so ever since I've been doing them, I consider them a great. You know, I you know, I would think it's probably superior to doing shrugs or doing high pulls or anything else. But you can put so much weight on the bar and overload it, and it's so simple to do it, and it puts the stress directly on your upper back and on your traps. So as far as development of those muscle groups, it's a great exercise. And I realize usually on a lockout, deadlift lockout, the problem is not because your upper back, your traps are weak areas, because your posterior chain, your hamstrings, or you're getting the bar off the floor fast, your hips are rising too fast, and so you have the bar way down low, and so you have to do all that pulling, not with your legs or with your upper back, and just grind it up. And so what you really need to work on is your posterior chain. Now, what I have noticed, okay, since I have been doing deadlifts, is my deadlift lockout now is excellent, super strong. I mean, it's a strong point for me. Once the weight clears my knees, I have no problem at all locking out. I keep the bar really close to me, and of course, that's because I have improved my hamstrings a lot from doing certain exercises. But the finishing point that I want to make here on this video, and the reason why I did this, and I'm kind of raising this question, is because I'm beginning to believe that rack pulls do carry over to your deadlift lockout, to your deadlift, and help you with your your deadlift lockout. The reason I say that is because rack pulls, not only do they develop the upper back and the traps above the knee rack pulls, is they also do to a degree develop your posterior chain, because whenever I do those, I always get sore in my hamstrings and my glutes. So I'm starting to believe that above the knee rack pulls do carry over to your deadlift lockout. They will not only develop your upper back and your traps, but they also will help you improve your deadlift lockout, because they develop the muscles that are weak and allowing you to get into that uh, bad, uh, disadvantaged leverage position that's causing the problem on your lockout. Anyway, thank you for listening. Wish you all the best in your training.